Well, welcome to another episode of the Scriptural Mormonism podcast. I'm your host, Robert Boland, with one, not just one, two, but three guests today. So really looking forward to this. Before we begin, just in terms of quick announcements, hopefully we will have Nathaniel Givens, the son of Terrell Givens, on later this month as a podcast guest. Also, this Saturday, I will be participating in a discussion on another YouTube page with Jennifer Roach, who's a convert from Anglicanism. We'll be discussing how Latter-day Saints, especially missionaries, can interact with those from a Protestant and Catholic background. Jen, of course, is a former Anglican. See episode 3, where we discussed and nerded out for 2+ hours about Anglican theology and liturgy. And also, I'm a former Catholic, so it'll be a fun discussion on issues like Mariology and authority and the apostasy. So hopefully that will be posted in the near future as well. That's the announcements. As I said, we actually have 3 guests today to discuss the issue of Come Follow Me for women. So the good news also is you won't be hearing too much from me today. Ladies, I will let you introduce yourselves, and then you can discuss the topic per the outline you sent me. So,
perfect. I'll go first. My name's Amanda Brown Mather. I am one of the writers for the Instagram account, Come Follow Me _women. I have a master's degree from the Hebrew University at Jerusalem in Bible and the Ancient Near East, which is a fancy way of saying I studied both the Hebrew Bible and some Assyriological studies as well. And now I do nothing with that except for some publishing here and there and this account, and I'm an event planner. Rachel?
So I'm Rachel Huntsman Peterson. I'm also one of the writers. Sarah and Amanda were kind enough to ask me back in January, February-ish to come and help write with them. It's been a lot of fun. I have a bachelor's from BYU in Ancient Near Eastern Studies, emphasis in the Greek New Testament track. So it's been fun getting into spending more with the Old Testament women. But besides that, I also studied a lot of modern Hebrew while I was doing my undergrad. And currently, I'm also not doing a ton in the biblical scholarship field. I'm currently I work in elementary school as a classroom aide, and I also work in the Orem Public Library. So it's a lot of fun. I like to browse around their religion section a lot. Sarah?
I'm Sarah Riley, and I graduated from BYU in Ancient Near Eastern Studies as well, with an emphasis in the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament. So I think that's how Amanda and we were in a lot of classes together. And I think, Rachel, I don't think we actually had any classes together, but I think, so Amanda's our mutual friend, and that's how we got to know each other. I'm doing a master's in library science at the University of Maryland. And so I really love primary documents. So I'm all about primary documents, and that's me.
Sarah's underselling herself. When she says primary documents, she wants to be the collector of all Syriac documents, and once she's done, to make those available online as a resource for libraries. So let's talk a little bit about our project. So it's kind of my brainchild that Sarah and Rachel very get off the ground for me, right? I have the idea, but I'm not a self-starter. So they provide the motivation and a lot of the content. Back in January, I texted Sarah and said, hey, all I hear from women in my then singles ward, and really women from like 18 to 45 are, where are the women in the scriptures? I don't understand them. I don't identify with the scriptures. I don't like reading them. Where are the women? What can I identify with? And as scholars, I knew that there are a ton of women in the scriptures. You just have to know where to look. So we wanted to make that information available to people scrolling on Instagram, people our age. That's something that I'm very passionate about, and as are the rest of us. Would you guys like to add anything?
Yeah, I guess one thing, I got really excited when Amanda mentioned this project to me, because, so a little bit of personal background, when I was a teenager in my patriarchal blessing, it advised me to study women in the scriptures. And so at that age, around 14, I started trying to find commentaries about women in the scriptures, and I got really frustrated because there's not a lot in the LDS perspective. And also, when I did find stuff, it just didn't seem to really resonate with more of what I hoped to learn about these women. So this has been a great space for me personally to not only just talk with Amanda and Rachel because they're amazing women, but also because I can talk about these women, and I feel in a safe space. Any questions or frustrations I have about studying about women in the scriptures.
This has been a wonderful project, also just because, like some have said, especially Amanda and I, we don't actually get to do a lot more with this thing that we've been studying for so long with the ancient world. And it's been a great excuse actually to, just get together and nerd out about all these topics we love. But the same for me. I grew up, and when I'd be reading, before I was on my way to the bus stop, and I'd be reading Paul with my father, preparing like just normal scripture study. And I'd just be like, I'd ask him, why does God not like the women as much as the men? Because what I'm getting from the scriptures is I'm not connecting as much. The same like Sarah said. And especially as I grew up in the church, that was a thing I definitely was missing, was being able to talk about the women in the scriptures in a holistic way. I feel a lot of times we talk about these women as if, oh yes, they're just so wonderful and saintly, and we don't actually talk about the problems from the narratives that come up. And it's been so great being able to address the hard things that are in the scriptures as well as the things that are wonderful.
I love that point, Rachel. And that's something that I'm really passionate about, in particular, is let's talk about the hard stories. Let's talk about the stories that make us uncomfortable. Let's talk about, what does it mean that Tamar is whoring herself out to her father-in-law, right? Like, that's a very uncomfortable story for a modern reader. How do we identify with this when that is what the basic narrative is? Where do we look? How do we have perspective on this story that maybe doesn't make what she's doing culturally okay, but helps modern day readers still connect with this woman who is incredible? There's a reason she's in the scriptures, but she may be a little bit more disconnected from us. So we hope to do that with our posts. Do we want to talk about how we examine women, and when we're writing and studying and preparing our posts? What do we look for, and what is meaningful to us in this project?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay.
I can start out. I mean, I can talk a little bit at least about the process. Back when I started my degree, everyone knows, like, people who study the ancient world, especially the Bible, we get really excited about it, and then we start getting really annoying in Sunday school. But because we love it so much. So I started setting a rule for myself pretty early on, saying, okay, unless I can make a very wholesome connection, I'm not going to bring up the specifics of translations and why this person's talk maybe was not factually correct. And that's kind of how I like to approach. I remember when the first post that I ever wrote with this group was about Rebecca, and I'd always connected with Rebecca, and especially because I studied a lot about biblical well scenes in the Hebrew Bible, and I could just go on about like So yeah, there's all these cool, interesting ties. But I'm like, for me, it doesn't make a lot of sense unless I can drive home and this is why it's important that we are making covenants. This is why it's important that we are supporting our spouses. And I was able to draw a lot of meaning from the story through the use of scholarship and things I've learned, but making sure to make it doctrinally applicable.
Sarah, do you have anything to add? If not,
Yeah. So I was just thinking, because I haven't really analyzed my own process about it. I think normally when I'm reading about women in the narrative, so just a little bit of background, my husband, Jonathan, he's also in biblical studies right now. He's getting his PhD in biblical studies at Catholic University of America. So I'm hearing this stuff all the time. He really introduced me to inter-biblical illusion. And so his influence has kind of helped play with my own scriptural interpretation. So if something's like, when I'm reading a text, like, oh, this is kind of like this other section in the Bible. And so then I look at that other section in the Bible and I'm like, yeah, there might be some parallels here. And so I just keep examining other parallels. So, I mean, if you are reading the Old Testament, or if you're, reading the Book of Mormon or the New Testament, you say, this is kind of similar to, this element is kind of similar to another story in the scriptures, then I say, go for it. Go look deeper into it, because you might find some interesting parallels and find a new whole nuance to the story.
For my own process while preparing posts, I love things that make people uncomfortable within the scriptures. That's my thing. Jonathan Stapley, who works at the Church History Library, and I were talking a couple years back, and he's a scientist by profession and then a scholar by pursuit. And he said, in science, the thing that makes you uncomfortable or that doesn't work, that's the thing that you want to study. That's your research project, right? That's the thing you get excited about, because it has to work. It is working. You just need to find out why. And I love that approach within the scriptures, which is not something we really do, right? We get uncomfortable, and the scriptures are supposed to be perfect. So how do we interact with this imperfect thing? So I really love finding the thing that makes me the most uncomfortable in the story and just delving into that. Maybe it still makes me uncomfortable at the end of the day. I'm never going to really like polygamy or want to live it. But at the end of the day, I would love to understand why this system worked for these people or why it didn't work. And that makes me more comfortable with the story and helps me understand it on a better level. And I hope it does for other people as well. So friends, how do we not be afraid for studying women in the scripture? It's pretty daunting, right? You have to find them first of all, and that's a pretty close reading of the text, right? If you're going to pick out somebody other than Sarah, Rachel, Leah. And so we have to find them, and then we have to find the sources that we can trust, that we're comfortable perusing about, to learn about these women. What are your processes on this? I should say.
Yeah, I'm thinking. So I think for me, for not being terrified of studying women in the scriptures, for me to kind of, because I mean, there's some very heavy topics. Some of it can be rather sexually graphic, and there's also violence against women in the scriptures. So I think the first thing off is to know that God loves these women, and to not be afraid of this. This is something that's important, that as women and as Latter-day Saints, we need to address these issues in a safe, faith-filled perspective. So secondly, but when you talked about sources for this year, for the Old Testament, I've actually found that Jewish scholars, they really love to go in depth, and they have really examined women in the scriptures. So there's one website that I love to go to called thetorah.com, and there's a bunch of Jewish scholars that post things on there. So that's one place where I love to go for some more commentary on it. And that's all that's coming to my head right now. So back to somebody else.
I love the Torah.com. A lot of my old professors write for them. So it's always like, oh, Brooke Schwartz did that. That's amazing. So it makes me really happy. And I go there as well. My background makes me comfortable in going to Jewish sources, but also everything on there that I've read that's not very religiously specific to Judaism, I completely identify with, right? Like, we're studying the same story, and a lot of times they've studied it better than I have, because they have one book, so they have the time to do that. Rachel?
So kind of going along with the whole concept of, again, where we're trying to find sources, we also have to start talking about the way that we are approaching the text, especially when we're asked the question of how are we comfortable studying women in scriptures. And one thing that I think about a lot, I have two things. One is that while studying the scriptures, it's really important to think about who was writing the text at the time. And the fact that a lot of the Old Testament is being written through the patriarchal perspective, it's important to keep in mind, especially when there's people like us who are very sad when not enough women are, given names or given the light that they should. And as well, I also think it's very important to note that the same way that I can look to some of the great men in the Old Testament, the women are not just for the women. Our page is not only focused towards women. We want to make sure everyone can understand the women in the scriptures. I've had such great conversations since starting this year, talking about the women in the scriptures with my husband, and he's gained great insights he hasn't thought about before, because, again, sometimes we only talk about the women of the scriptures to the women. And it's really important that we realize that, no, half the population can still be examples for the others.
I love that. Thank you. I'd like to kind of switch into, Rachel, when we were preparing for this, you talked about studying with Catherine Taylor, who's at the Maxwell Institute, and her emphasis and what you learned about archetyping women. If you wouldn't, and then Sarah and I can play off of that, but you're the expert on that one. So if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I'm glad I get to be called the expert, even though it's been a couple of years, and I am very sorry, Catherine, for anything I forget. But one project that I was able to help her with was, we were looking for the examples of different archetypes of women in scriptures, because we have the idea of, we have the mother, we have the maiden or the virgin, we have the whore, we have, again, women who then don't fit into the normal archetypes, like we have we have Judith or Yael, who are going and doing things we're not expecting. And it was really enlightening seeing that, again, a lot of how the scriptures are written are based off of the concept of putting, all the characters, but especially women, into these archetypes. But that's a thing that can be, this is now my own interpretation, that's a thing that can be really limiting, actually, when we're talking about women, is saying, oh no, you can only be a matronly mother figure. So that means you have to act exactly as you're supposed to according to this. You go out and you get the well water, you do all of the sewing, you be the woman from Proverbs. But then in contrast, then it means that we only look at Tamar through the archetype of the whore. We only look at her for this prostituting herself to her father-in-law. When again, we don't talk about the fact it comes from a desire to have security and to have family, to have children. It makes us not see the women in a whole perspective.
Well, and I think it also, what does that do to us culturally, right? Where motherhood in our culture is the prize, right? So I see posts all the time about from my friends on their infertility struggles and what that does to them through their self-esteem, particularly their religious self-esteem, because we are archetyping ourselves because these are the models that are presented to us as acceptable. And so if we can get outside of that as a culture, which is a big ask, but if we can get outside of Sarah was a good mother and that is it, or
I'm trying.
or a fantastic mother,
which is great. You're the only mother of us in this group.
yeah. But like, how do I identify with my friend Sarah and also Sarah from the scriptures? How do I identify with Hannah when I don't really want kids right now? I just got married. That's not on my radar. I would like to get used to this whole living with somebody else thing before we introduce that. So how do I identify with Hannah's song when I don't want children yet? And I think there are ways to do this, but we need to get out of the archetype, the very strict mindset of archetyping people. And that's a big ask, because it's what we've that's our pedagogy, right? That's our training. So Sarah, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the theme of this year for women, for me, is that women can be ambiguous. I mean, we first started with Eve, and there's so many interpretations about Eve, and whether what she did, her decision was right or wrong. So I think we just need to kind of embrace the fact that there's different interpretations, and your own life experience can change throughout time with how you view these women in the scriptures. And I think it's meant to be like that. Sometimes it's kind of vague, and so you have to take away from it from your own perspective.
Exactly. There's a book I really, really love. I think I bought it for you, Sarah.
Yes, you did.
The women, it's the one with the quilt on it. Holly Reese Blumen is one of the editors on it, and it's at Deseret Book. And I will remember it after this podcast. But there is a lovely book that you can find at Deseret Book, and it has a blue cover. And President Hinckley's daughter had an essay in it, and as do Kate Holbrook and the founder for Days for Girls and a lot of other people. It's honestly one of my favorites. I own very, very few books, and Sarah has it, see? And it's one that I own physically. And President Hinckley's daughter has an essay in it, and she talks about to be a woman is to be ambiguous. And she references Eve in this. And I think that's what I love. Not that one, but that's another one I absolutely recommend. I'm obsessed with it. But that one also has actually really great women's stories.
It's not the book No Ordinary Women?
What? Sorry?
Is it the book No Ordinary Women? Or is that a different title you're thinking of?
It's a different one. I'm terrible. Sorry, Robert.
I'm sure we can probably put it in once you remember it, we can add it to the notes.
I'll include it in the show notes once you remember the title.
Thank you. But she talks about Eve, and to be a woman is to be ambiguous because Eve is the archetypal woman, right? And she is absolutely and completely ambiguous. And that was a really defining moment for me in honestly being a woman, but also in studying women, to realize that everyone is, like every single person that we are going to study on this account will be ambiguous, and we have to approach them in that way because they can be anything.
On
And
that note, sorry,
No,
I
no.
don't want to jump in too much, but something keeps popping up in my head. We talked about how it, again, we need to keep this ambiguity because again, how else will we relate with people we don't relate with? But I'd also like to make the mention of, once again, it's a plea to us culturally to change, but also to stop just looking at women as one thing. Because I remember right when I got married, I started feeling like I was being pushed into archetypes of this is what it means to be a wife. I have several friends who was like, this is what it means to be a mother. If I'm a mother, I am no longer a friend. I am no longer, this is not a messy bun. This is a mom bun. And feeling like your whole identity is changing. But especially the whole concept of we are ambiguity. We are ourselves. We are not just our one defining trait. Eve is not just the mother of all living. She also made choices for herself and had to decide. And she was someone who followed God, and that was important. Sorry for my interruption.
No, I love it. Do we have any other thoughts on this topic before?
I don't know if we want to, I just had another thought about sources that I think would be easy for people to look up. The Septuagint actually has sometimes more additional text than what we usually have in our King James Version. And so, like, for instance, Esther, the book of Esther, there's a lot more of verses in the Septuagint than there are in our King James. And also, like, for instance, there's in Job chapter 2 in the Septuagint, it talks about Job's wife and talks about her job, like going from place to place trying to find work. So, I mean, you can find some interesting tidbits sometimes in those sources as well. I think you can find an English translation. Let's see, it's the New English translation of the Septuagint, and it's free online. It's published by Oxford University Press. So
It might be, maybe.
No, it's online for free.
Great, I love that. I have really, on that note, I've really enjoyed using Carol Meyers as a book that I will also link. And it's like 1,200 pages of women in the scriptures. And she does named ones, she does unnamed ones. She makes some up of, hey, we know that that one, yes, that one. I have it on Kindle and I am constantly going through it. I was going through it to prep for this today. And it's a great way to dip your feet into women in the scriptures, and then have, she links to articles and other resources at the end of each entry. So it's a good way to know that you're getting good perspectives and a broad overview on all of these women. So I've really enjoyed that one for Old and New Testaments, I think.
What I'll do for the show notes is I'll include the LXX and the NETS translation, but also I will share the Amazon link to the Women in the Scriptures book as well. So
wonderful. Okay, so we've all had our lives influenced by these stories. You don't spend years and years studying this stuff every day without getting very passionate about certain stories. So the three of us came up with the stories that have really influenced us from the Old Testament about women. And we're going to talk about them a little bit to kind of go through our process and how we connect with women in the scriptures. So if nobody else wants to go first, I am happy to. But
go for it.
Okay, so like I said, I love things that make us uncomfortable. I was lucky enough to take an Israelite popular religion class with Dr. Dana Pike from BYU. Sarah and her husband were in that class, so it was always fun, and it really influenced the rest of my my time and studies. I love asking, okay, what's the story of Ishtar, or what's the mythology of Baal? Like, why are these things bad? And such a polemic in the Old Testament. So that's something that really excites me. And in 1 Samuel 28, we have the medium of Endor. I think the King James translates it as the Witch of Endor, which very much conjures for me like the Black Cauldron, right? For some reason, but that's not it at all. And I did a lot of my undergraduate and then some graduate work on her. And so basically the story is Saul's about to die. He's not a great king. He doesn't really do what the prophet Samuel says he should be doing. He sacrifices inappropriately at certain points, which is a big no-no for, you know, the guy who's technically the leader of the state religion to do. So he's on his way out. David has been anointed king, and David, this is the eve of the battle where Saul is going to be killed. His dynasty is, or his house, I should say, they are going to be taken out of power, and David is going to fill that political vacuum. And so he kind of sees the writing on the wall. He knows what's up. He has tried to, Israelite religion has specific ways to invoke deity, right? Like, that's the point of a religion, is to talk to God. And so that there's casting of lots, like we see in First Nephi, and there's obviously talking to your prophets, there's making sacrifices. There are different things that you can do that will say, hey, I'm over here, help me, right? To God, who will then provide an answer, usually through his prophets. Yeah, that's not working because Saul has lost the favor of God in this scripture, or in the story. And so he needs to seek outside counsel, because he's like, I'm gonna die here and I need to know how to win this battle. That is, in the ancient Near East, that's a really big thing. Like, God helps you win battles, honestly, because you have a lot of them. So with the Israelite state religion sanctioned venues for this being kind of, they're not working for Saul. He tells one of his entourage to go seek a medium at Endor, or a necromancer, I should say. And they find the medium, or witch of Endor, and she has a familiar spirit. We are really not sure what this means. There's a lot of debate with scholars, but for some reason, she has the gift of being able to talk to the deceased. So she can do this. And so Saul comes to her disguised, because the penalty is death for this, doing this. And Saul has been the one implementing the, okay, we're not doing this part of religion anymore. This is a folk practice. This is not part of the state cult. We're getting rid of this. And so he comes to her in secret, and he wants her to bring up Samuel from the dead so he can talk to Samuel. So she does this. Bruce R. McConkie says that she didn't. Thank you to Elder McConkie, but that is, the text seems to say that that she did. So the text seems to believe that, and for this discussion, I would like to take that at face value. And so for all intents and purposes, she brings Samuel up to talk to him. And Samuel says, what are you doing? And you're gonna die tomorrow because you haven't been a great king. I mean, that's overgeneralizing it, but that's the basis of the story. Saul is devastated. This woman of Endor feeds him. This may be part of the ritual. There's some debate on that. and but she is kind to him nevertheless, and finds out that he's the king and kind of scolds him for coming to her and putting her in danger. And Saul leaves and is killed the next day. And it's very devastating, right? Like this is the climax of Saul's story. Like this is his fall, right? And it is tragic and it is horrific, and this woman is involved in it. And I think the story is entirely compelling. It's beautiful, it's stunning, it's emotionally fraught in a way that I don't know that we always see in the Old Testament. But what I love most about this is this woman, I like to apply it to my life, right? And I've learned a lot about kindness and generosity and interfaith relations from this story, because here's this woman who is not of Saul's faith, right? She is not practicing Israelite religion as she should. And if she is Israelite at all, she's communicating with God in a different way. And in a way that if this were taking place modern day and I were Saul, it would be like going to a Methodist or an Anglican or a Catholic for revelation, right? It's similar to my own process, but if I were being very judgmental, I'd be like, oh, she can't receive revelation, right? Like she's not of my faith, but she does. And she does call up the spirit who talks to Saul. And it does work. And it reminds this story, maybe a little bit eisegetically, reminds me that God can talk to everybody. And it's really not our choice on who God talks to and who he doesn't talk to. And that people who practice whose religion is different than mine can have spiritual experiences that are very real, and to take a moment and not discount those and to lean into those and to listen to them, because I'm probably going to learn a lot. So that's my takeaway from The Witch of Endor. I'm not sure that that's what the author intended, but part of this process is to make it relevant to us. And sometimes we do have to stretch a little bit to do that. Would either of you, do you have comments? Would you like to go next?
I just love this because when I was first talking to Amanda, she's like, oh, I just love The Witch of Endor. I'm like, what? So I just really admire Amanda for not being afraid of these things, because if I was picking a woman to study, I would not have picked that woman. So I really admire that.
She speaks for kindred spirits, I guess. I don't know.
So, but now I've come to appreciate it now, thanks to Amanda. So I'm very grateful for that, bringing more understanding. Rachel, do you want to go, or would you like, or?
I'm impartial.
Okay.
I could go.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Anyway, so don't mind us, just following our outline. So, one woman I wanted to talk about a little bit was Esther. Esther is, unlike the Witch of Endor, a little more well known, a little more talked about in Sunday school and all the way down to primary. And it's actually down in primary. I want to start my story about Esther because I've loved Esther for most of my life. You'll hear why. So growing up, like many families, it's on Sundays when I was, 7, 8, you can only watch movies that are based around the scriptures. So I could watch Living Scriptures, VeggieTales, stuff like that. And I remember I ended up having 3 different companies, little films about the story of Esther. And so one day I'm like, you know what? I'm going to watch all 3 of them, and then I'm going to read the account and see what actually is true. And I like to think of that as my first introduction to biblical criticism, because I actually started thinking like, oh, what is actually in the text and what's just made up that everyone says over and over. And there's a lot. again, I grew up with her, like, I love the example of like, she's so brave, she goes, and not to mention for, you know, young Rachel, who also loved her princess stories, a girl becoming queen, getting dressed up in pretty dresses. I'm like, great, I love it. And then I grew up a little more and I started again realizing the uncomfortable parts of the story. It's again, is Esther in a harem here? We don't know the sort of situations that were happening. All I know is that I'm like, from what I know about Jewish culture and stuff, like, this is not how a woman is supposed to act. You're not supposed to go marry outside of your people. It's probably not be part of a harem. And just and I also, the thing that made me most uncomfortable was the fact that I stopped seeing Esther as an actor in the story. It always seemed like she was just being told what to do and she went. Her qualities were beautiful and obedient. And for someone who has been like raised and I've decided that I want to be someone who takes control of my life, I want to be an actor, I want to be the person causing change, I was uncomfortable with this concept of, no, it's all the men making decisions in her life for her. It's Mordecai telling her where to go. She's at the whims of the king. And when she finally gets the king to listen to her, she can't even say it right away. She has to have 2 banquets before she actually asks for her people to be saved. But especially as we were studying Esther this year, it's one of the first times that I honestly gave her the grace she deserves in the story, because she is remarkable. Everyone in the story of Esther is so stubborn. It's Mordecai shows some aspect of stubbornness by refusing to bow to Haman, even if his reasons were good. Vashti was stubborn in not going to see the king. The king is stubborn in she won't come. Well, then let's banish her. Or if people weren't being kind to my top dude Haman, let's kill him. And there's a lot of just extremes in the story. Haman's like, let's build gallows that aren't even structurally sound with how tall they are. Esther's the sensible one here. She's the one that's, how I'm choosing to view her now is that she is the one who's choosing to acknowledge her situation as it is. And she makes the moves that she was able to in her station in life. And that's meaningful to me, because how many times does it feel like we are powerless in the world? We just came out of a pandemic, or still and things aren't the way we want them to be. We weren't able to go or do the things we wanted to. Some people are stuck in stations in life or in relationships that cause them pain. And does it help if we say, well, you're bad, you're not getting yourself out, you're not pulling yourself up by your bootstraps? No, we have to be able to follow God to the extent that we can in our life. It gave me a lot of grace, not just for Esther, but for all of the women in the scriptures who I looked on negatively until this year. There's a pretty well-known quote by Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, the well-behaved women seldom make history. And that's not a bad thing. It's, yes, some of these women in the scriptures aren't doing things that we deem completely revolutionary, and maybe they're not all acting the way that we want them to, like maybe they're hurting people, but because we don't actually know them, we know them through the scriptures, but we don't know them ourselves, we can't judge them the way that we judge ourselves. We can't just say, well, I would do this, because we don't know what they were feeling, and we don't know the pressures of the cultural customs they were under. And in short, by studying Esther, I gained a lot of respect and patience for not just the women in the scriptures, but also the women in my community. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I guess it'll be my turn to talk about someone. I like how you're talking about giving women grace, because obviously we weren't there. So I think this is the perfect thing that we need to think about, because I'm choosing to think about Sarah and Hagar, because this is a little personal for me, because, you know, my name is Sarah, and it's kind of the same thing with a Rachel experience. You know, you grow up, you like, look unto Sarah, your mother, you know, in Isaiah, they praise Sarah. And then it wasn't until about my 20s when I really started diving in, like, oh my gosh, she like made Hagar leave with this kid in the wilderness, and she almost dies in the wilderness. So kind of reversing a little bit. So that was very hard for me, but reversing back a little bit, you know, Sarah, I think she has a lot of insecurities. And I think it starts off when they're in Egypt, you know, Abraham kind of disguises as she's not my wife, and Sarah gets taken to the Egyptian court, and we don't get a lot of details about what she had to go through there. We don't know what happened. But maybe she has kind of doesn't like Egyptians anymore after that, you know. So, and Hagar is, I think she's an Egyptian. I haven't read this in a little while, but I think she's an Egyptian. So, and Abraham's been promised this prosperity, and I'm sure Abraham told his wife, hopefully, about what God said to him about that. And so she's like, okay, I'm going to have children, and we're going to have a big family. And they get old, no children. And so finally, I think she wants these promises to be fulfilled. So she tells Abraham, take my maid, take Hagar as your wife. Not as a wife, but that she can raise children for us. And maybe there was a part of her that was kind of hoping that, you know, it was Abraham's fault that they could have kids. But lo and behold, Hagar gets pregnant. And I think, you know, maybe that hurt. As you know, I've never had any struggles with infertility, so I don't want to say anything that could imply that infertility can be extremely painful experience. So I think just a lot of pain that she's had in her life involves her actions. And then angel saves Hagar. She comes, you know, they say, go back to your mistress, submit to your mistress. And, you know, I think that took some courage for Hagar. And then later on, when Sarah miraculously has Isaac, and she sees Ishmael, the text is kind of funny, like Ishmael laughing with Isaac or playing with Isaac, something like that. I think it's a play on Isaac's name, because Isaac is like laughing and Ishmael's laughing. So she's worried about something that's going on between these two. And so she wants Hagar out. And this is the part that's really hard for me, because it's just Abraham gives her, you know, a jug of water and sends her out into the wilderness. And I'm thinking, isn't he a prophet? Isn't he like our you know, we're the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. So wouldn't he have been like, no, like this is our family? Is this justified? Again, like Rachel said, we don't know everything. We'll give everybody some grace. I think another thing to ask ourselves is, how many perfect families are mentioned in the scriptures? Like, name one perfect family in the scriptures. I think there's a reason that there's not really any perfect families in the scriptures, because that's not life. But yet God is working through, is helping Abraham, and he's helping Hagar, and he's helping Sarah, right? And there's actually a post that I did a little while ago about how Hagar wandering in the wilderness has some parallels to the story of the binding of Isaac. So if you want to look at that, you can look at it a little bit more. Maybe I'll just hash out a little bit. So like Abraham rose up early in the morning, and also Hagar, and then Abraham travels into the wilderness with Isaac, and Hagar travels into the wilderness with Ishmael. And there's both an angelic intervention for both. And there's a lot of texts that we could go into. So if you want, as listeners, if you want to go in and compare the two, I think it would be a good, cool thing to do. But anyway, trying to collect my thoughts. And Hagar is delivered. And so I think for me, for one thing, now I have some struggles being named Sarah. I still love the name Sarah, but for me to take it personally, I think I need to deal with my own pain so I don't give pain to others, is one of the lessons that I draw from this. And also, I think maybe there's a hint of generational healing at the end, because later on we learn that Ishmael and Isaac bury Abraham together. And so I think maybe there's been some peace resolved and that there's some contact with each other. I love this Jewish tradition where Isaac brings back Hagar after Sarah dies, and he remarries her, because Hagar means stranger. So it may not even really be her name. It could be someone else. And so some traditions say, oh, it's Keturah, is Hagar. So that's another interesting thing to think about. So another interesting thing too to think about is that right after Hagar leaves through the wilderness, and it says, let me look at it. It says, and right after these things, it's like right after these things, then God commands Abraham to take Isaac and sacrifice him. So maybe these are meant to be viewed together, and maybe even viewed as a consequence for what happens to Hagar and Ishmael, that, Abraham's being tried once again with another son. So, and then also a thing is we never hear from Sarah again. So her death is mentioned, but there's nothing else. So sometimes I wonder, what happens afterward. We don't know what happens afterward, really. So that's my thoughts about Sarah. It's difficult, right? And I think, again, just to close my thoughts, that there's broken families in the scriptures, and there's broken families in society today. And so we need that grace, God's grace that he gives to all of them, and he works through all of them, and his promises are fulfilled to them. But it's complicated, right?
I love that. And I love, with all of us talking, we're talking about emotions, right? And we have a text and we have to supply the emotion and say, okay, what is this person feeling right now? What is it like to send your child out into the wilderness with this person that you were somehow legally contracted to, right? Like, what are the feelings there? What are the feelings of being in a harem? Like, we can equate that to, what does it feel like when you don't feel like you're the most important thing to your spouse or your significant other or your parents or whatever relationship is most important to you? What does that feel like? And the Bible asks you to supply these emotions because it's not going to tell you. And I think that's a way all three of us really delve, and it's a study tool for us, because that's how you stretch the story, right? And that's how you learn to love the story or hate it or have ambiguous feelings about it. that's the process, right? That is how you study. So let's talk about why it's important to study women in scripture from an LDS perspective. This is a hard question. We sat around and came up with in a chat and came up with some reasons that we love. We're at a critical juncture right now. In our notes, we have the catchy line of "It's not our mom's church," right? And of course it is. The church stays the same, but our generation and kind of Gen X through Gen Z interprets things differently. We want different things. We want more information on these people. We're hungry in a way that I don't want to say previous generations were not. They just interpreted things differently. And we're used to gray area. We're used to being uncomfortable. And we want a straight up explanation that may have made previous generations uncomfortable. And so in that way, it's not our mom's church anymore. We want gospel topics essays. We want, I'm going to say transparency, but we want the scriptures to be transparent. We want to know what's up with this weird story instead of skipping it. Would anybody else like to speak
I'd like
to
to
this?
jump to jump in on that. Again, you talk about this hunger that we have, especially in the terms of, my words are escaping me. We're in this weird place in the world, especially when it comes to everything. It's with the political system, we have a huge polarization. It's the same with church stuff. If you're looking at information for women in the scriptures, a lot of the stuff you find is either some really fluffy, nice stuff, but that doesn't satisfy this need of like, no, these women are real people, and I don't want to just gloss over the hard stuff.
Sarah, and then princess, you know?
Yeah. And then you can go to the other side where it's hard to find some good scriptural interpretations, critical interpretations that are from faithful perspective. That was a thing I've struggled with for a while, is trying to be like, I want to know why there's problems. I want to acknowledge that there's problems, but I don't want to leave the church over it. I want to acknowledge the good in the gospel and the doctrine while still pushing for change in my society. And that's one thing why I think it's really important to be able to still study women in the scriptures in an LDS perspective, is to give women like us, women out there, or men that are hungry for this, some more information, and to make it known that yes, you can study critically and still keep your faith. It's not mutually exclusive at all.
I love that. Sarah, do you have anything?
I think earlier this year, we read some of the Pearl of Great Price, and it hit me that I think how many more women were revealed in the Pearl of Great Price. We have like the daughters of Oneida, and then we have some more information about I can't remember their name, the two wives.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about. And then we also have Egyptus, I think is the other lady. So I think having an LDS perspective is that we believe in modern revelation, and for me, there's this hope that more will be revealed about women in the scriptures, because there has been revealed about more about women in the scriptures. And well, I'll give you one example. President Nelson recently, in talking about covenants, he mentioned Noah's wife, and he mentioned that she made covenants with God. I'm like, that isn't in any of the texts in the Old Testament, but he just kind of, you don't quite notice it unless you look for it, but he just like says it in one sentence and he moves on, right? But like he So that for me was revelation about women in the scriptures. And so I think, when we're having some angst about like, there's no women in the Book of Mormon, that we can have this hope that more stories will continue to unfold and to stay where you can receive revelation.
We had this plan. We planned to talk about Kate Holbrook before news, was it 2 weeks ago? But we would be remiss if we didn't talk about her and others' legacies in our faith tradition, and scholarship and the work women are doing. Do any of you want to talk about that? I'm happy to, if not.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Okay. So for all of us, Kate Holbrook was an icon, right? She is a huge role model. You can see my face. I'm just very happy. I love her and her husband's work. I've learned a lot from it. I quote both of them constantly in things I write or should be writing. But 10 years ago, when I really wanted to be an academic and this was the path I was going to be on, she was an inspiration of, hey, women can look at scriptures critically and they can be active, and like have husbands and families and jobs, and I have this desire to do this thing that's not really modeled for me. And she, among others, was someone who modeled to me what critical scholarship looks like, well, from a faith-based perspective. Like there were no holds barred, right? She didn't sugarcoat it unless it was to an audience that obviously she played to her audience, but she didn't sugarcoat her scholarship. And she did us all a favor, both in personal study and in professional study with that. We also would not have the information that we have on Eliza R. Snow and others without her. And so in being in a place right now where we are taking a look at women's narratives and we do care about them, she is a pioneer in that. And I love living in a time where I can say that. Any other thoughts?
Well, I was thinking, I really love, when we were discussing what we should mention in the podcast, I loved both what you said, Amanda, and what you also said, Rachel, about like, we don't need to have one interpretation. It can be fluid with lifelong learning. We can continue to go back to these women and find more things to identify with. And if we don't understand something, maybe later on in life we'll come back and we'll find more insight into these women.
To speak to that, we intentionally don't sign our posts and don't let our readers know who is writing it, because we want there to be a place where, like the Trinity, there are three personages. Robert, you're gonna kill me. There's 3 and 1 and 1 and 3, right? So let's have different ideas, let's have different perspectives, and let's still be unified. That's something that's really important to me and important to our friendship. Like, we can disagree pretty violently over what we think about these women. I don't think we have yet, but there have been some posts where we've taken different perspectives on people, and that's a good thing because we are at different places in life. And I love that about, particularly in today's climate, but also that's what scriptural interpretation is. do we want to talk about, my note here says it's okay to be conventional and unconventional. Do we want to talk? I love that line. Do we want to talk about that at all?
It's a beautiful line. It's, again, I've seen it especially in when we are, especially those chances where we all address the same woman. It happened a lot earlier. And it's great because sometimes we want to sit in what makes us uncomfortable. We like to put forward the edgy stories. But one of the things that I know we're really trying to do here is we're trying to help everyone understand the woman in the scriptures. We're not just going towards a conventional or unconventional audience. It's even if you're not a member of our faith, it's like, if you still cherish these words, please come participate in our discussions. It's because, again, I think it kind of comes back to the fact that we're not looking at the women we're studying as one figure. We're looking at them as ambiguous. We're trying to see that, yes, there are some ways that I want, like, if someone wants to live the sometimes called cookie cutter ideal of an LDS woman, these women are for you. If you are someone who's trying to push against social tides of change, great, these women are for you. It's the great thing about most of scripture is the fact that it has multiple interpretations. It has poles that you can look at in different ways based on your perspective.
Oh, I love that.
Amen. Amen.
Anything else we want to say?
I guess it's something to note. Talked about this, how we're planning on not just doing Old Testament. We're going to keep going because, I will be so sad if we did not cover the women in the New Testament. I'd be very sad. I'm very excited for that.
We are relying on you, Rachel. I'm going to be a learner while we do this.
Be like, help us understand Greek.
Also, we mentioned briefly that we would, like Sarah mentioned, that hope for more revelation on women from the Book of Mormon, especially before we get to that year. But I'm going to be very sad if by the end of the next Book of Mormon year, if people cannot name all 6 of the named women in the Book of Mormon. It's not too hard to memorize.
We're going to talk about it a lot. To that point, too, there should be more, right? The world is made up of 50% women. So part of our account is fictionally restoring those narratives. In Jewish tradition, it's called Midrash, and we're going to lean into that heavily. What's Nephi's wife like, right? Jacob had a wife because he had kids. What's she like? Lots of other people, but what's Moroni's wife like? What'd she think of this whole thing? So we're going to be doing that a lot as well. Try going a little bit off the academic track, but still examining the text critically and saying, hey, where can we supply these stories? Where can we lean in and say, what's it like to live through a war, right? What's it like to have to move and be unhoused? And we can maybe not personally attest to those things, but we have stories we can supply for that. So, yeah. Okay, I think we're done, Robert. You want to come back and join us?
But you've been doing such a great job leading the discussion. Maybe you should actually just take over the podcast. But joking aside, that was really good. And as I said in the show notes, I'll link to the Instagram page, but also link to the LXX, the NETS, and the other sources. And Amanda, once you remember the name of the book, let me know and I'll add it to the show notes. So thanks again for coming on. I do appreciate it. So maybe maybe a few pints here and there that weren't discussed, but I'm sure like some people will be interested or may wonder about it. That's okay. One topic, and I know why this was not mentioned, largely because you would need like a very lengthy podcast to do it justice, but I'm just going to bring it up because I know people listening to this and women in the scriptures will want to bring it up, and that's the topic of Heavenly Mother. Now, without going too long on this, like what sources or recommended reading would you suggest for the topic of Heavenly Mother? Because whenever you discuss women in the church, women in the scriptures, inevitably there will be like Heavenly Mother, so might as well just like at least mention it and kind of mention her and make some recommended readings, if you will. So, any helpful resources you ladies would suggest on Heavenly Mother?
One article I would suggest is BYU Studies. They did a survey of historical teachings about Mother in Heaven. It's by David L. Paulson and Martin Polito. It's titled A Mother There, and I think you can read it online for free. The article's free, and so it's a great historical survey about all what's been said by general authorities about Heavenly Mother. So I think that'd be a great area to start.
Obviously, there's the Gospel Topics essay. That is another great place. The article that Sarah mentioned is much more in depth, so I think we like it a little bit more because we're trained to read the sources. I have not read B.H. Roberts Foundation's work on that yet, but it is there, and knowing Robert, it's phenomenal. Yeah, I'm excited for this. I'm a person, well, our account dwells on art. We use a lot of famous art. I'm very excited for next year to pull out all the Greek Orthodox icons that I've been taking pictures of all over the world. So I really love contemplating art. It's not concrete, but there is an entire genre of Heavenly Mother art, and it's beautiful and it's fun to look at, and it makes me think differently. I also think if we go to Heavenly Mother, right? We go to this thing as like the epitome of women in Latter-day Saint tradition. That's great. But how do we understand this thing that hasn't really yet been revealed if we're not studying all of the other women that have been revealed? Like, I can't do that. And so as a point of study, I would really encourage study Eliza R. Snow, study Elizabeth Ann Whitney, study Camilla M. Kimball, study Eve and Leah and Sarah and the Witch of Endor, because this is still religious women who have divinity in them. Rachel, I think we stole everything, but do you have any suggestions?
I mean, that's most of it. It's my only other suggestion or thing to add would be study the nature of divinity. We have so much that is revealed about the example of God, and we have so much in the New Testament Book of Mormon about Jesus Christ. We learn a lot about divinity through them, and so in my understanding, a good way to study, try to understand the concepts of a mother in heaven, heavenly parents, plural, is to study divinity. And yeah, I don't have as much to add there.
I think that was a great point, though.
No, thanks for that. And also, when you're doing the New Testament next year, I'm looking forward to your discussions about Mary. I have a huge interest in Mariology and its development, so looking forward to the post on that, as Amanda can attest. So
yes, yeah, your book is going to be a point of study for me.
Good. And I look forward to the icons you'll be sharing as well, and the art. But Sarah, you kind of mentioned like the importance, like, say, studying like biblical allusions and basically intertextuality, and how that kind of brings narratives, later narratives, to the text alive in terms of the relationship to past narratives. You kind of mentioned Abraham and the near sacrifice of his son in Genesis 22, and like possible parallels with that and the Hagar incident. So would it be like a good book or a good article on the guide, if you will, or how to engage in interbiblical studies, if you will?
Oh, you mean just like in general about?
Yeah, in general.
Well, I think.
Or it can be specific.
Robert Alter.
Okay.
Robert Alter.
Alter's
I highly recommend Robert Alter.
Oh, that's good. Alter's good. He's written the books, and this is for listeners. I know you guys know this. The Art of Biblical Narrative and the Art of Biblical Poetry, and various translations of other texts as well. And because this is something I actually like as well, Biblical Interpretation in Ancient Israel for Fishbane, and also Hayes's book, Echoes of Scripture and the Letters of Paul, on pages 28 to 32 is a very good sevenfold exercise or rule book, if you will, on how to gauge echoes and intertextuality. So thanks for that. And of course, like, being a bibliophile, I try to get other people to read. Now, you mentioned like some good books already, but would there be any other good books on women in the scriptures, like women in the Book of Mormon, women in the Old and New Testament, or feminist interpretation of scriptures, and also like maybe like a good introductory book to maybe like say the Old and or New Testament that you found helpful, because to get like a lot of this, you'll need like some background knowledge of say the ancient Near East, the New Testament, Hellenic studies, in order to like have a better appreciation of some of these other volumes as well. So, any recommended like reading at an introductory level, but also maybe an intermediate level as well, that you would suggest or you found helpful yourselves?
I think for an introductory level that's easily accessible, a Deseret book is Jehovah and the World of the Old Testament, and is it Christ in the World of the New Testament?
Jesus in the World of the Testament.
Yeah. Those are great. They have very basic interpretations of, hey, what did a pyramid look like, right? Things like that. But it gets you pretty in depth, and there are pictures, so it brings things alive a little bit more. And then, does anybody have thoughts on intermediate ones? I have my favorite, but
I'm trying to remember it because we read one for Dr. Pike's class, and it was his last name was King.
Oh, Life in Biblical Israel. Philip Steger and King.
Yeah, King and Steger, Life in Biblical Israel.
Yeah.
If you want kind of what women's lives would have been like in the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
I have one in mind. It's a very basic one. It's sorry, I'm looking around. I don't remember the title. But there's been some things that BYU's Religious Study Center has put out that has some more basic, just the history background that could be really helpful. I'm trying to remember. Just skip me.
Yeah, we'll link that one. I think for women in general, there's a lot of great stuff. Obviously, we love primary sources, so things like At the Pulpit and the First 50 Years of Relief Society documents are fantastic. I love Laura Thatcher Ulrich. What is it? A House Full of Females was revolutionary for me. That's obviously women in church history, but you love Phoebe Woodruff coming out of it, and I learned a lot about women in my own faith tradition. Another book is The Power of Godliness by Jonathan Stapley, just talking about women in early Latter-day Saint tradition, specifically ritually. I'm making my husband
it's also an excellent book because it demonstrates the development of liturgy as well. So, like, for a liturgy nerd like me, that was a fun book as well.
Yeah. That's one of my husband's in the bishopric, so I have bishopric training books. So that's one of them. I'm like, you can't talk to women about this unless you know this. So he loves that. But I'm also reading, I will link to it because it's on my Kindle, so I can't get to it right now. But I'm reading a great one on, I'm really into polygamy right now, which makes me super fun in conversation because I'll just pop off with like weird anthropological things about polygamy and everybody gets uncomfortable. But when I do this at work, obviously, but it's kind of a more sociological view on, hey, what was 1870 to like 18 or 1910 polygamy actually like? What was life like? So I'm really enjoying that one. Robert has it, obviously. So, and it does a really good job at explaining, hey, here's what we can tell you, and here's what we can't. Which is really great training for, or like a brush up for my critical scholarship training of like, here are the things you can't say, and here's the information that you're never going to have, but we wish we did.
Sure, and just on polygamy, plug for like Brian Hill's Mormon polygamy documents and Joseph Smith polygamy, and there's a good book if you want to go into the anthropology of polygamy by Zeitzen, Polygamy: A Cross-Cultural Analysis. Came out over like a decade ago, but it's a pretty good read as well. So for those who may want to like go to like non-LDS sources.
Right. Anybody else have books they super love?
Or even good websites or any other things like that.
I remember the name of the book that I was thinking of. It's a Bible reader's history of the ancient world. It has a lot of different BYU professors have put together the history and putting the Bible in context.
Yeah, and it's edited.
There you go.
Yeah,
I remembered it.
Yeah, and it's edited by Kent B. Jackson.
Yep, you have it right there.
Yep.
That's the one they use as a textbook for the Jerusalem Center. So.
Yep.
Yeah, I read it like a couple of months ago, and it's a very good volume. Like I know a lot about the Old Testament, but like going in, like it's kind of like the introductory book to the Old Testament. I wish I had years ago. So it's very good. Yeah.
There's one blog that I do really like. Robin Cohn. I hope I'm saying her last name right. Cohn. So robincohn.net. She has this whole blogs about women of the Bible, and she has her thoughts about it, and then she also links to a bunch of other books related to women, and so that's where I go sometimes too.
Yeah,
that's good. So any other comments or recommendations you would like to make?
I think I'd like to say that we're getting better at this. Fiona Givens, I went like my area in Seattle flew her up with Terrell to address like faith crises. I think it was in 2014, so it was almost a decade ago. But she said something that's really stuck with me is that she's like, Latter-day Saint tradition changes very quickly for a religion. And she used to be Catholic, and she was like, just now Catholics are questioning, well, maybe unbaptized babies don't burn in hell. Maybe. And I mean, from Augustine to now, to say maybe is a big deal culturally for them, right? And as they're examining things. And so Latter-day Saints change every 6 months in conference. We have new changes, right? Whether those be more policy driven or more doctrinally focused, but things change, and maybe a lot of people think for the better and a lot of people think for the worse, because that's culture. But this is a point where we are developing better teaching, better resources. We're digging more into text, and so it is kind of an information age for us, right? Where we have more access to things, and it's only going to get better. With that, I think that's my comment.
And anyone else have any final words or recommendations?
Go forth, study. I have 2 kids, and I'm in school and working. I can do this. You can do this. Everybody can be a scriptorian. Go forth and study. You got this.
Preach.
We have this last little thing on our outline saying that we're on this path of understanding with God. We talked a lot about how things are changing, and a big tenet of our faith is this concept of personal revelation. We don't know a ton about the women of scriptures or even really much of anyone. And the thing is, it's really through your own faith practices, that you'll be able to come to a place of, even if it's not quite understanding, a place of acceptance, of being able to engage in the wrestle with the hard things of scripture, or even with the easy things that are just hard to do, and be able to come out, again, either understanding or at least at peace.
Well, thank you for that. And as we come to close, again, Amanda, Rachel, and Sarah, really do appreciate you coming on today. And hopefully more people will sub to the Instagram page, because it's very good. I love the artwork, but I also love the nerdy exegesis and background, such as the discussion about Ishtar, which is the most recent one. And for the artwork for the podcast episode, I'm actually going to be borrowing the one you used of Eve and Mary. Because I love Mariology, so I'm really, as I said, I'm really looking forward to like the discussions of Mary and Luke, Acts, and Matthew next year. But again, really do appreciate the great work and how you make it like fun and nerdy, and you kind of discuss like topics that most people don't discuss for whatever reason, but you make it very informative and accessible, and hopefully more people will actually have a better appreciation of women in the scriptures. And it's not just for the ladies, it's for everyone, as you noted. The story of Hagar or the Witch of Endor, even if she doesn't have any Ewoks, is still of importance to us guys as well. So with that, really do appreciate it, and hopefully we can actually have you on again in the near future, maybe discuss women in the New Testament or some other topic as well. If you ever want to, you're always welcome to come on again. So with that, again, really do appreciate the time and effort, not just for today, but in the Instagram page as well. And hopefully others will check it out as well. So thank you again.
Thank you
for
so much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Until then, take care.